Okay, hello, welcome everyone. As I've said, if you've just snuck in the door, if you've got that mobile phone with you, could you please make it go to silent or turn it off for us? Thank you. Welcome to you all. Okay, so to begin, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Walbunja people of the Yuin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. My name is Cathy Milliken. I'm President of the Tuross Head Progress Association, and I welcome you all to this community forum to meet the candidates for our federal election for the seat of Gilmore. And on saying that, I've had quite a number of people ring me from south of here saying, well, we want to come too. And when I tell them that none of their candidates will be here, they wanted to know why. Okay, so we have 7 candidates for this election, and I do thank the 5 candidates who are with us who have taken up the offer to attend tonight. They will in a moment tell us who they are and a little about themselves. For those that have never been in the hall before, the toilets are just out the back there through that corridor on the left. So before I hand over to our facilitator for the night, Karin Starma, I do ask everyone to please be respectful to each other during the proceedings, or you will be pulled up, won't they? Yes. So thank you everyone, and I hand over to Karin.
Thank you, Cathy. Good evening and welcome everybody. My name is Karin Starma, and in my day job I'm a senior journalist for Region Media, digital news publishers of publications including About Regional, which you should know around here, as well as the Riot Act in Canberra, and I've also worked for the ABC. Tonight I'm your host for the Tuross Head Progress Association Candidate Forum, and I've got to say, 3 times in 4 months, we're getting pretty good at this, aren't we? We're a little bit chillier tonight, so we'll endeavour not to hold you up. We're going to try and keep to 2 hours because those seats are hard and it's cold outside, so we'll do our best to stay on time. The idea for this forum is to give you, the voters, an opportunity to hear responses from the candidates in a wide variety of questions on issues important to this election. For the candidates, this is an opportunity to help the voters get to know you, beyond the corflutes and the ads. And we hope that you can use tonight to capture our imaginations and inform our votes. Tonight's questions have been formulated from suggestions by the members of the association and the wider community. Issues have been specifically selected to be relevant to federal responsibilities. In the hope that you can hear real-time responses to our important question, candidates were given a list of likely topics prior to attending tonight, but they weren't given specific questions. The questions are designed to be put to all of the candidates, who will each take turns to answer, but you may pass if you choose to. I didn't put numbers on my pieces of paper. Responses will be strictly limited to 2 minutes, with a 30-second warning to conclude. And candidates, I ask each of you to keep to this limit in fairness to the others and allow us to get through as many questions as we can in the 2 hours we have this evening. As Cathy said, first up, candidates will have 2 minutes to tell you a little about themselves and why they're standing to be the next federal member for Gilmore. I will then follow with some prepared questions to the candidates. Once this section is concluded, we will have some questions submitted in advance to be read from the floor. If we have time, we will take some questions without notice from the floor, again directed to all candidates, please. The success of tonight, like the previous 2 that I've been involved in, and like the well-functioning democracy we crave, it depends on civility and mutual respect. This involves listening, not point scoring. The candidates have given their time to be here to speak with us, and disrespect will not be tolerated in any form. So please keep your heckling to yourself and let us all listen. Thank you to everybody for coming out this evening. I do hope you get useful and enlightening responses from the candidates tonight, and let's hear from them now. So, candidates, there's a microphone here. So each of you will have your 2 minutes. When the 30 seconds bell rings, start to think I'm going to wind up, and you don't have to use the whole 2 minutes if you don't feel you need to. And then once we've concluded the 2 minutes, just pass the microphone over. And for each question, we will run through the same order. We're not changing the order, just to keep things in a bit of a rhythm. Okay? So, first up, we will have Carmel Mccallum from the Greens. 2 minutes about yourself.
I also would like to acknowledge the custodians of this land and their connection to the land, the waters, culture and community. I grew up in Campbelltown, eldest of 8 children, studied pharmacy at Sydney Uni for free, met Howard, who is in the Navy and still serves as a reserve, and have been married for 43 years. We have 4 adult children and 2 gorgeous grandsons, and we live in Camberwarra, northwest of Nowra. I owned my own pharmacy in Nowra for almost 10 years and worked in many others wherever we were posted. We lived in the Blue Mountains for almost 20 years, which has many of the same challenges and attributes as the South Coast, both beautiful and in need of protection. In Gilmore, we lack decent public transport and have been neglected by successive state and federal governments. I joined the Greens in 2004 when we invaded Iraq illegally, supporting the Andrew Wilkie campaign in Bennelong, and he's still one of my favourite politicians because he has principles and stands up for people. I believe that the Greens Party has policies which also do this and are best for looking after our people, our flora and fauna and our planet's well-being. Many Australians are suffering from anxiety and stress because of the changing climate and the emergencies we have experienced in the last few years, and because they're being left behind by a most unsafe government, the most unsafe we've ever had. More than 3 million people are living in poverty, 1 in 4 children, and many of those are without adequate or indeed any housing, decent regular meals, and are struggling just to survive. Is that 30 seconds? We grew up believing that governments were voted into the parliament to look after everyone. I had free tertiary education and I could look forward to a promising future, to raise a family, own my own home and have a fulfilling life. I feel that this part of our culture has been threatened by the coalition's government hunger for power at all costs, taking political donations and rewarding their benefactors 10,000-fold. This isn't fair and has to stop. The Greens want a properly legislated and resourced independent ICAC. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Nina Digilio. You might guess from my name that I come from an ethnic background, and I do. My parents are Italian, so my dad's from Sicily and mum's from Sardinia. I'm the eldest of 8 children as well. I grew up in Belmore in Sydney, and I have 2 adult children. My son's in the UK, and my daughter is studying to be an OT, an occupational therapist in Nowra, with a lovely businesswoman. And I have a background in nursing. So I've been a registered nurse for 32 years. I've worked in intensive care, emergency departments. I've also worked in the burns unit. I've been a clinical nurse consultant in aged care and in Parkinson's. I did serve the people of the Eurobodalla area. I've run many workshops on Parkinson's down here, so I do know some of the people from the aged care facilities around here. But it's been a beautiful day here today that I've spent in Tuross. I've been here before, but it was really great to know, get to know some of the shop owners today. So I've also been a councillor on Shoalhaven City Council for the past 5 years, and that's been a great experience, learning the political arena and understanding some of the policies and how they're formulated. And the things that we really need to do is ensure that people, the reason why I went to politics is because I didn't understand it. And one of the things I really believed in is that people need to be included in the decision-making process, and the consultation of the community is very much lacking in politics. So what I've seen, thank you, so what I've seen is that legislation gets passed and you're not included. So one of the things I'd like to see in politics is that people are included. Hopefully, as the night progresses, you'll get to hear what policies that speak to me. What I'm finding on the ground is roads and potholes, housing affordability, constitutional reform, tax reform, health and aged care, and to cease legislation being passed quickly and including people in all decision making. Thank you.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Fiona Phillips, the Federal Member for Gilmore, and I would like to start by acknowledging the Walbunja people, the traditional owners of this land, and pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say that an Albanese Labor government supports the Uluru Statement and will provide a First Nations voice in the Constitution, as well as supports the Makarrata Commission. We take closing the gap very, very seriously. That's why we have also committed to a Birthing on Country Centre of Excellence for the entire South Coast and a number of programs there to help close the gap, particularly around health. So I'm hoping that I can, again, be a member for Gilmore. I've had the utmost privilege of working with so many different individuals and groups, the association here, and I know that there's many people in this room tonight that are very involved with many community groups that I've really loved being a part of and supporting. So through these difficult times that we've all been a part of. Look, a little bit apart from that, if you don't, maybe before that, I grew up on a dairy farm near Nowra. I went to a very small public school, proudly went to my local public high school, was very lucky, went away to study economics at university, and I'm married to my husband of 25 years. We have 4 sort of teenage to adult children, which I'm very proud of as well. I want a better future for everyone's children, for everyone's grandchildren. I want our elderly to have the aged care that they need, and we need to support people, and that's what I'm definitely about.
Thank you, guys. Sorry I don't do well standing still. I'm quite an animated talker. Firstly, I do want to acknowledge the First Nations people of this country and obviously all the country that really means a significant amount to us. Now, I am your UAP candidate for Gilmore. I've been a small business owner in the electorate to the north and the south for the last 11 years. It's the stories that I've heard through my job that basically made me decide to run for politics. At this stage, I feel disenfranchised with both the major parties, and that's why I chose my alliance with the United Australia Party. We are facing down the barrel of another recession, like it or not, and we are the only party that's taking any sort of budgetary repair into this federal election. We are $1.3 trillion in debt. This debt is greater than any other debt Australia has seen. The United Australia Party are proposing a 15% export licence to remedy this debt, and that will basically cover the debt in the next 18 years. Now, this by definition is Australia getting its fair share of its natural advantages. Everyone will benefit from this export licence, and it will mean that your kids, your grandchildren don't have to pay the debt, and successive generations to come. We are looking at a housing crisis. There's more crisis than just the climate that we're facing, and this housing crisis is coming down hard. Inflationary pressures are at an all-time high. We're looking at over 5 inflationary pressures, and basically we need to do something about housing prices and housing affordability now. The United Australia Party is proposing a 3% cap on interest rates. This is possible within the Constitution, and we're also going to make the first $30,000 of your mortgage payments tax deductible. This will help keep people in their homes and help keep mortgages affordable. I know many of you in this room have probably already paid off your mortgages, which is an extremely fortunate place to be. What I want you to think about is your kids, your grandkids, all of the above. At what point will the interest rates hit? Thank you, guys.
Well, g'day everybody, and first of all, can I start by acknowledging country and pay my respects to elders both past and present, and also acknowledge all of you for being here, because obviously nights like tonight are an opportunity to discuss and have a very clear understanding of what this election's about, but more importantly about the community that we're part of and the direction of our country. Can I also acknowledge Dr. Michael Holland, who's here as the member for Bega, and just say to everybody, I think if you look back over the last 3 years, it's fair to say we have seen the most incredible strength within our community. The people within it, the fact that we've been unified, both in terms of survival with Black Summer, through to recovery, and then having to deal with COVID. And I've seen people come together in a way in which our community should be so proud of, regardless of politics. Because I think it's fair to say at a local community level, pretty much every single candidate here tonight would agree. The state of our local infrastructure, the strength of our community organisations, and of course also supporting a raft of initiatives across our community. For me, making sure that we can continue the work that we have seen from the community is really important. I think this election's about the community. It's got to be a positive campaign. And it's about ensuring that everything from local community infrastructure through to big projects and our highways, through to supporting small business, through to supporting people as they deal with the challenges of the cost of living, be it fuel prices, through to grocery prices, supporting our farmers, through to supporting our veterans community, requires a very important focus at this time. You know, we live in an uncertain world. China are looking to move into the Solomons. Our national economy is under enormous pressure. And its experience, and certainly the experience that I have to bring, having been a state minister for the last 10.5 years, including state treasurer, through to being in state politics, to working in a bipartisan way, as in the way that I did with NDIS with Jenny Macklin, to make sure that we can make Australia the fantastic place that it is and continue it. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Great timekeeping. Love it. So first up, we plan to ask the list of questions from our main list, but we've got one question from the floor that is to be asked by Max Castle, who needs to leave. So we're going to let him have the floor first up, and then we'll go back to the list.
Welcome, candidates, and thanks for coming to Tuross. There's a little bit of a background introduction prior to one question. In the northern section of Gilmore electorate, there is an issue with the commercial southern fish trawl, which is proposed to be transferred from the state to the Commonwealth. The commercial and recreational officials don't support this proposal because of the destruction of breeding and undersized fish. The trawl extends from Barrenjoey to the north to the Victorian border of the south, excluding marine parks. New South Wales recreational fishing body supports the commercial fishers in their desire to leave the industry. They believe their fishing method is no longer rewarding or profitable, as they are decimating stocks, disposing of too many small fish each night, which are dumped overboard. Leaving the industry will prevent waste, ensure sustainable fish stocks, provide a better fishery for the local commercial trap and line fishers, and prevent further seabed damage. Other types of existing local commercial fishing practices will continue. My question is, if elected, would you ensure the transition of the southern fish trawl does not proceed to the Commonwealth and the commercial fishers involved gracefully exit the fishery?
Yes, it appears that there was some work done on this previously where the fishermen were not treated fairly. And it seems that your organisation is willing to work with the state and the federal to prevent or to allow these commercial fishermen to exit from the industry, and that could actually lead to more sustainable fishing and increasing in stocks of fish for a sustainable future. At the moment, marine parks are not policed properly anyhow, so it's probably a good thing to see that the areas would be kept safer allowing recreational fishing still, but not the damaging trawling fishing. So I would just like to say that any science-based research that allows this to happen is the way to go, that it needs to be comprehensive, adequate and representative so that all biosystems are protected. So I still wonder, and I'd like to question, what is behind the motive of the Commonwealth wanting to take over the first 3 nautical miles off the coast of Australia? Are there other interests? Are there political donations that are behind this motivation? Because for far too long, I think you can look at a lot of things that are happening at the federal level. There are many political donations, people being seen on for all the wrong reasons. So we need to protect our coastline and allow juvenile fish to grow into adult fish and to sustain the numbers and to make sure that we don't have any species threatened or endangered.
So I concur with a lot of that, except I want to acknowledge that you have put this proposal forward, and I actually agree with what you have said, and that we do not want to see this industry go into the hands of the Commonwealth. What we've been seeing lately is that a lot of the Commonwealth do work with corporations. These industries belong with the people on the ground. You know what's going on with this industry, and you deserve to have your, your policies and your procedures that you do to have this industry thrive locally. So if the fisheries want to continue producing for the people, I agree that this must continue, and I do agree with Carmel with a lot of many things that she has said regarding the corruption that can be, that needs to be investigated, and that's why we do need a federal ICAC to ensure that our federal government are not doing things like having political donations in the way of these proposals. Did speak to you earlier about this, and I just want to thank you for putting that forward. That's not my area of expertise. So for someone like myself who has a nursing background, it's really important that I get the gravity of what's happening in other industries and learn to understand it and support the experts in that field. So just thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Max, and thank you for your question, and thank you particularly for your advocacy around a whole range of rec fishing issues. So thank you to the Tuross Head Fishing Association, the Eurobodalla Fishers. I've had the great opportunity of working with a number of people in the rec fishing industry, and I really thank you. Who likes fishing? Got a few people like fishing? I like fishing too. And I think the main thing here is that there needs to be adequate consultation with the community, with rec fishers. And I've got to say, one of the great honours that I've had in Parliament, actually we get to nominate to be on certain House of Representatives committees. And I sit on the House of Representatives Agriculture Committee, which also looks at fishing, aquaculture, and a whole range of issues. And one of the reasons that I sat on that committee was because I knew I had people like Max in this community and many fishers, so I wanted to be a part of that. So one of the things that I would say is I'd be very concerned with, obviously, with that lack of consultation and, like you're saying, a transition that people didn't want. It needs to be based on the science. But one of the things that I would be keen to do is nominate an actual inquiry for that Agriculture Committee into the southern fish trawl, so that we can actually hear directly from interested parties and groups, so that we can get a better picture of what's going on, because I certainly haven't been fully briefed on it, but I think it's something we need to be aware of, and I'm very happy to support if an Albanese Labor government gets in, nominate an inquiry into that for that committee.
Thanks, guys, once again. Sorry, I just don't sit still. Now, in part, I have to take a little bit of this question on notice. The main reason being is I have been working in the Ulladulla region for a very long time. The reality is I know the trawlers personally, and I made a call directly to 2 of them today, and it seems like there is an issue with respect to some quota crossing basically the federal and state lines. Now, they are still willing to work with the process, and I'm more than willing to act on everyone's behalf. It's probably best to suggest that I am most suited to try and resolve this issue, knowing the families personally and knowing exactly how they would interact with basically moving on from here. So if it's okay, I just need a little bit more time to work on this. I did make phone calls today as soon as I got the brief yesterday, and I will be able to hopefully negotiate a resolve. So thanks.
Thanks, Max, for your question, and obviously thank you for your advocacy in relation to recreational fishermen. I've been very sensitive over the years in relation to the dynamics between the commercial fleet and recreational fishermen. I've seen it at its best and I've seen it at its worst. In relation to this issue, yes, I recognise the fact that the commercial interests seeking a buyout, which would be obviously significant, in support with the recreational fishermen is important. I'm not aware of any proposal to change the 3 mile limit at all. But what I am very sensitive is to the fact that our fishing fleet, particularly in the commercial fleet, are constantly having to butt up against regulations at state and Commonwealth level, and sometimes the right hand and left hand don't know what each other's doing. Today I went to the co-op in Milton Ulladulla. There is a terrific example there with the bluefin tuna, where that co-op is now exporting to the States, Hawaii, Japan, an incredible product. And it's generating, supporting those families who are involved in the sector, and of course the Australian domestic market also has a very real interest in terms of that tuna product. In relation to the fishing method, obviously this one's governed by the state, and ultimately, again, a decision has to be made by Fisheries in terms of the magnitude of the buyout, and it's obviously very significant per individual, and that's something which, again, I'm happy to work with the state government on in making sure that that advocacy is right, given that direction. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The next question we've got is on housing affordability. The question to you candidates. Gilmore, like many other regional electorates, is suffering from a lack of affordable housing. Indeed, housing at almost any price. This leaves first home buyers, those on low incomes, and workers looking to move to the region with little to choose from. This shortage is widely acknowledged as due to a mix of factors, from the loss of almost 700 homes in the bushfires and migration out of the cities, to federal government tax policies favouring real estate as an investment. Simply releasing more land to increase supply is not the only solution to this problem. So what other policy levers can you bring to the electorate to ensure a viable stock of housing for the citizens of Gilmore to own or rent?
It is a shocking situation. It's become a national emergency. It's past being a crisis. This started a long time ago when the federal government and the state governments started to back away from their responsibility to make sure that everyone had a safe house, a safe, adequate house to live in. I was just reading today that Gilmore has nearly 83,000 households. There's a shortfall of 400,000 properties for social housing across Australia. In Gilmore, 39.4% of households are in financial stress. 69.6% of renters are in financial stress. 19.8% of people with mortgages are in financial stress, and even 30.4% of investors are in financial stress. It's become a real estate market where you see the advertisements saying, you know, you can buy or you can sell. It's all about investment. It's all about profit. It's not about people, and it's not about homes. The Greens have a policy called Homes for All. We want to set up a federal housing trust by taxing billionaires and 1 in 3 corporations that doesn't pay any tax at the moment. 55 gas companies pay no tax and make huge profits. Companies are taking their tax money offshore and avoiding paying tax. We can actually find the money to build houses for everyone. We have a policy called Homes for All to build 1 million homes in 20 years, 750,000 of these be social housing, 125,000 for people who just want to pay rent, no one pays more than 25%, and another 125% with a shared equity of 75%, which when they sell, they can take the profit. And, oh, sorry, there was one more thing. I can't think. Anyhow, that we need to house everyone. No one should be without a house in a country as rich as ours.
Thank you. In my nursing background, I have seen a lot of homeless people. Some of the stats that Carmel quoted, I have too, but we have 1 in 200 people are homeless every evening in this country, and we have 1/3 of homeless people under the age of 18. So that's we really do need to look after our youth in this space. So some of the things I have been looking at doing in this space is to reduce the taxes on housing, things like stamp duty for young people. Now, I know the government did try doing that at one stage, but at the moment there's actually no housing stock. So we need to go back and look at how we're going to get more housing stock for people. So when we do go for developments and work with councils to have development, we ensure that that there may perhaps a program like a rent-to-buy program, and that people that purchase those houses are not holiday makers. We understand that the Airbnb business is quite attractive. There needs to be some caps on that process. What's the other thing I had here? And ensuring that homelessness services have provision so they have housing stock to help those people who are on the street. So there's 200 people who don't actually have a home. We can provide a homeless service for them in the interim till we can support them to get into their own place. So there's some of the strategies I have thought of, and I also welcome, because I'm not attached to any political party, thank you, I am open to people's suggestions because I think the people have solutions on the ground, and I warmly welcome those solutions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, look, there's no doubt that we have an absolute housing crisis, and I'm going to be honest, the government has completely vacated this space over the last 9 years. As the federal member, I see more and more people in distress, their house being sold out that they rent, being sold out from underneath them, not being able to find a rental, and we're talking about people sometimes without incomes, but people with incomes even, on low incomes, supporting children, and it is absolutely tragic and a travesty that this has not been fixed. I'm proud to say that an Albanese Labor government will do a whole number of things to address this. The first we announced over a year ago, and that is to create a Housing Australia Future Fund, which will see the biggest boost in affordable and social housing that we've seen in decades. That's an increase of 30,000 affordable and social housing properties, and we'll quarantine 10,000 of those for our frontline workers, because we need workers to work in aged care homes and support our local communities. There's also property set aside also for women and children. The other part to what we're doing as well, and that was announced just actually yesterday, which is our Help to Buy scheme, and this will help cut the cost for people to buy a home by up to 40% for 10,000 Australians a year. So this will actually provide equity in and assist people to buy. The other big part at the moment is there is no national plan. There is no leadership on housing. So we will create the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, which will work with the states and territories to importantly address some of those issues that you're talking about, Karin, in your question, because we have to work together at the federal level, the state level and the local level. And that takes leadership by the Commonwealth. And that's what Albanese Labor government will do.
Okay, the issue is obviously a very complex one. The reality is all of our properties have gone up in significant value and there's no real land earmarked for release. basically it is a federal, state and council issue that needs to be addressed. We are looking at trying to decentralise Australia as a population, give industry and companies encouragement to move into more regional areas with a 20% tax deduction if you live 200 kilometres or more and your business operates within that area. Again, we can't just manufacture houses anywhere. It's great to have policies that address all these issues, but we all live in Gilmore and we know the reality is that none of these houses are going to fit into that price bracket that's going to fall into being subsidised if you look at the figures. Again, the United Australia Party is trying to focus on making the houses more affordable through interest rate caps. We're also looking at reducing the tax on your second job, so that way you don't get taxed at 50%, and just generally encourage affordability through a tax deduction of the first $30,000 on your mortgage. So it is a complex issue. There's not many complete, I guess, resolves to the actual development in our regions. The hard thing is not many people in Gilmore want to see further development, and even less want to see us start going up. So we've got to start looking at dispersing the population and decentralising the population and giving businesses an encouragement to move into more regional areas. So thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I agree with Fiona in terms of the coordination between federal, state and local in relation to housing. There is no doubt when you see 506 homes lost in a shire like Eurobodalla in a bushfire, the pressures on supply are very real and quite profound. That's why small business in particular at the moment are screaming out for more employees, and of course a lot of those employees are dependent on rental properties. One of the local solutions that was found during the fires was a call out through real estate agents to actually see if Canberrans in particular would make their properties available, which largely sit empty most of the year, make that available to people who are homeless. And we have an example of a local example of this where one of the local ministries have identified 150 empty properties and now are seeking to marry those properties up with people who are in essence homeless. And that's the type of thing where we actually have a look at the housing assets that exist within the local community and try and find local solutions with the support of local, state and federal government. There has been efforts made in relation to encouraging, in particular, renters to enter the housing market. And there's been 60,000 Australians who've been assisted with that, the First Home Guarantee Scheme, which is about supporting those who can save for 2.5% deposit, and then it's matched by government. And we've seen people actually enter the housing market that way. And in terms of that, what's been exciting about that is 41% of those people have actually stayed ahead of their mortgage payments. In fact, they're ahead of the mortgage payments. So that's encouraging, and that's why it's important that that scheme, along with the other schemes which have assisted 300,000 Australians enter the housing market, is very important. Our community, in terms of its home ownership, is around 71%, which is about 6% higher than the state average. We do need more social housing, there's no doubt about that. And one of the things which, again, local initiatives which are happening where the community housing provider is seeking through local government a change in community title to be able to build on those blocks and put units to assist particularly those who are homeless with entering into a social housing property. Thanks.
Thank you everybody for your responses on an important topic. Next one is just as crucial, and this one's on climate action. A short question. What opportunities do you see for regional areas like ours in pursuing climate action? And what measures or policies would you use to leverage these opportunities?
Of course, the Greens is the party of climate action, and we've been talking about this for 30 years. One thing is we would stop the stage 3 tax cuts as well, which are estimated to be $184 billion of lost revenue, $9,000.75 in everyone's pocket over 200,000, including Mr. Palmer and Gina. That has to stop. That's money that can be used for action on climate change. We will also be phasing out the $12 billion fossil fuel subsidies to companies which are becoming unviable industries on the world market. We want to increase subsidies for batteries and electrification of small business and households, reducing energy costs. Renewable energy is the cheapest energy there is. We want 100% renewable energy by 2030. We want zero net emissions by 2035, and it is possible. It is possible. 75% by 2030. If we don't do this, we will be burning up. 2050 is pie in the sky rubbish. We have to act now. Balance of power can mean that the Greens, and we're close to balance of power if we get 2 more senators in and another lower house person, that can make all the difference to work with the government to change and have real action on climate change. We will push to move to green steel production using hydrogen, and all mine workers will be assisted to transition into new meaningful long-term work. We will be able to set up new industries in this area, green energy, technology industries. Technology is part of the story. We should be exporting technology and not coal. We need to put an export tax on coal. Coal is the element we need to tax. We can adopt cheaper green energy sources and look for new ways of producing technology and materials using green minerals and green technology.
Okay, I've got a bit of some of those perspectives work for where I'm coming from, basically to reduce harmful emissions to our health, cease logging of trees, investigate geoengineering, weather manipulation, which is something not ever spoken about, and it needs to be investigated immediately. Now, if you're a farmer and you're looking up in the skies, you see the impact of your crops. I've had several farmers come to me who are very, very distressed with their yield of crops, and one of my actions is to investigate geoengineering and the impacts of that and solve it. The other thing we need to initiate is Tesla and solar and hydro energy initiatives so that we can have better electricity use or better use of energy in our regions. So for me, geoengineering is a real concern, and I really hope that other parties look at this. It's really important that we get a handle on the impacts of our farmers on this very process of geoengineering and weather manipulation. And the chemtrails in the skies, if you do look up, and I challenge you, if you haven't looked up in the skies and seen the crisscross in the skies, then you really do need to look up and have a look, because it's all across our region and it's quite frightening. So that's where I stand on the climate issue, and it may be a little bit oppositional to the Greens, but I think it works in alignment because I care about the environment as much as a Green does. Thank you.
Thank you. So what opportunities do I see for our area in addressing climate change? Well, we are in an absolute climate crisis. There can be no doubt about that whatsoever. I don't think we have to go too far. We've got where everybody has lived through the drought, the bushfires, the floods, the landslides. The list just goes on and on and on. So there's never a greater opportunity for us to solve the climate crisis. We've seen quite honestly, energy policy paralysis by the government. There just has been total energy uncertainty. And Albanese Labor government does have a 2050 net zero target, but importantly, we also have a 2030 target of reducing emissions by 43% by 2030. We have a Powering Australia plan, and I've got some copies of that here that people can take away and have a look at. And under that plan, we've got a whole suite of policies to actually get to our target. They are policies like solar batteries, solar banks, which will assist renters as well. We've just announced a community battery at Maloney's beach. We've got an electric vehicle strategy as well. We've got a whole suite of policies. It's about upgrading the electricity grid. We will transition to renewables with that target. And importantly, we will create renewables jobs. There will be 604,000 renewable jobs across Australia. And importantly, 5 out of 6 of every of those jobs will be in the regions, including in our region. We have great opportunity. Our Powering Australia plan is backed by the Business Council of Australia, the National Farmers Federation. There's a reason it's backed by those organisations, because it's a sensible plan. It's time to end the climate wars. It's time to get on and address climate change. And the only way to do that is to vote in an Albanese Labor government.
Once again, thanks guys. Now, no one's doubting the consensus that we need action on climate change. We need to do it as quick as we can, but we also need a smooth transition. The reality is it is going to be expensive to basically shift our economies. It is going to be a big deal to fill the voids that the money from certain industries brings in. We do really need to look at affordability on an end consumer level. The reality is if people can't afford their groceries because of inflationary pressures, if they can't afford their mortgages, their motivation at the end consumer level is just not going to be there to choose the expensive electric car. To date, you know, solar panels, you still have to pay a lot of money for them. So until we get this direct end consumer affordability issue under control by paying off the national debt, allowing people to afford their mortgages, in the end, no one here is going to be able to buy a $70,000 electric vehicle. There's more to this emergency that we have to look at, and part of it is the national debt and freeing up the individual decision to make those greener options. Okay, so thank you.
When our region became the human face of climate change during Black Summer, along with a whole raft of other factors which affected the way in which the fires behaved, it became very obvious to me that the community sentiment, particularly in our region, shifted quite dramatically. I know that certainly in terms of climate change, it's one component of this. We've got to move to a circular economy. We can't continue to have 9% of the world's natural resources only recycled or reused and use the other remaining 91% once and then either admit it or put it into landfill. So our whole nature of regenerative economy, underpinned by social equity and better efficient use of water and efficient use of energy, is something which is really important. When I was Transport Minister, I made sure that we started to take the right action. Converting diesel buses into electric, where we're now seeing Australian jobs in Western Sydney, developing an electric bus which is 30% more efficient than anything else produced around the world, happening right in this state. Signing City Trains up to a renewable energy contract when they're 4%. They're the 4% of the customer base when it comes to baseload electricity. Devising an EV policy which took away stamp duty, which put in place grants and delayed a road user charge, is all part of this. Investing in hydrogen, which is what the government's doing now, $1 billion, could generate some $50 billion of economic uplift in terms of jobs and opportunity just by shifting in that way. But Australians themselves are taking action themselves too. 1 in 4 Australian households now have solar. We've now seen investments in projects like Snowy Hydro 2.0, and we've got a lot more to do in this space. Expending energy arguing whether it's real or not has to be a thing of the past. We have no option now. And I will be taking to Canberra a real need to look at a circular economy, and particularly in terms of our region and the opportunities that stem from it. Thanks.
Okay. How you going? Getting wriggly yet? All right. We're about halfway through the questions and we're running to time, so that's good. The next topic for the question is telecommunication issues. This electorate has a long history of underfunding of telecommunication infrastructure. In 2022, we still cannot travel the length of this electorate or across to the ACT without encountering the same black spots on mobile coverage. Homes and businesses still suffer from unreliable data speeds for internet access. And more than 2 years on from the bushfires, telecommunication equipment on Mount Wanderer has still not been secured. This is despite pleas from Uravadala Shire Council. So question, what will you do to ensure Gilmore's technology issues are addressed?
First of all, I'd just like to show you our climate plan, peer-reviewed. It's the third time we've done that for the last 3 elections. Communication is essential to business and education. And in the recent past, we had satellites which were 3 times oversubscribed so that children who are doing distance education couldn't even get their schoolwork downloaded. And we were on that satellite at Camberwarra because we were a bit out of town and we relied on that. And I always thought how unfair that we're using it when children are missing out on their education. I can't understand that we started with an NBN back in 2007. I think Tony Windsor said, do it now, do it right, and do it whatever. And we're still struggling with it. We should never have changed to the copper to the property, to the house from the street. That has slowed it right down. It's made it extremely more costly because all those big green vats you see in the street have 8 batteries in them, which are really expensive, and I don't think that even comes into the 54 billion or so. Where we live at the moment, we're on fixed wireless, and that's Camberwarra, not far out of Nowra. We have to go outside to make phone calls. Sometimes we can't make phone calls or get messages. Our internet is appalling. So living in the bush or anywhere around the coast, which is not far from main city areas or towns, people are struggling to get download. We were at the motel at Moruya last night, and I said to my husband, I think we'll move down here. We're getting a really good download speed because we weren't going tick, tick, tick. It's still doing that just like a dial-up where we live. And it doesn't seem that if you pay money, you get more, you get a better speed. It doesn't matter what you pay, which we saw the companies having to pay back people for falsely telling them they could get higher speeds. It's time that it was fixed. It's time that we had optic fibre, which we invented in Australia, took to the Middle East back in the 80s, to every house, every property, because when there's a fire or an emergency, we need communication. And in the Shoalhaven, they've actually, with the resilience system, set up communication places for emergencies, and it's going to work really well.
Thank you, Carmel. Carmel said a lot there, but I'm just going to make mine brief. I think the regions have been neglected totally in this area, and there was nothing like the pandemic to show us that communications was vital. So a lot of children and businesses required the Zoom link so that they could have communication. A lot of those didn't work so well in the regional areas, so like Carmel said, I'm going to agree with her on that one, that we really do need the nodes improved, and the regional towns deserve their communication lines improved. We also, there is a technology of 5G that's been spoken about. There is a communications legislation that's coming through, and before we initiate anything like that, we absolutely need to do a full conduct and research into the impacts of the well-being and health outcomes on human health and animal health before we release something like that to the people. So that's where I sit on it. It's a no-brainer. The people need to have communications, but we need to have communications done in such a way that it does not impact the health and well-being of the people into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I deal with a lot of telecommunication issues. I know it's a very passionate topic for people, and understandably so. Look, I guess the first thing I'll just talk about some of the things I've been fighting for the Clyde Mountain Tower, mobile tower, to be finally delivered, which it has. I know it's obviously not perfect, but it's a significant improvement. I know people have been waiting a very long time for that. An Albanese Labor government has already made a commitment of $3.5 million to fix mobile black spots along the Princes Highway, particularly between Bateman's Bay and Ulladulla, with 2 mobile towers there. So I really welcome that. We've also made a really important announcement around the NBN, and I'm glad people mentioned that. And Tuross Head, there's actually going to be an additional 45,000 homes and businesses in Gilmore that will benefit from an upgrade from fibre to the node to full NBN. There's a number of towns and villages that will benefit, and I'm proud to say that Tuross Head is one of those towns. So when the NBN came in, Tuross Head got a dud deal. It's like a patchwork quilt. You've got different technologies and it just wasn't acceptable. Labor will fix that. We will upgrade the NBN, and you only get that under an Albanese Labor government. Telecommunication Mount Wanda, I've been working through the disasters really to improve telecommunications, and I'm glad to see that that has been rebuilt, but there's more to do, including Mount Wanda Tower needing composite power poles. I have worked hard with Telstra to get additional cells on wheels that we can roll rollout in times of bushfires or disaster. We've got increased battery backup at the mobile tower here at Tuross. And finally, there's an emergency response fund for disaster mitigation that the federal government has not spent. We will turn that, part of that, in $200 million a year into a disaster ready fund to help our area for mitigation.
Okay, telecommunications and black spots along the highway is no doubt an issue. It's a safety issue, and at some point someone is going to need a phone and they're not going to have it. Out the front of my house, the pit, the NBN workers, every time they come out to fix an issue at my house, they basically take a photo of the pit with 1 foot of water and what looks like a slinky that my children have been played at the bottom of it. So clearly, I'm just going to make a point of what the, I guess, the local MP can actually do. From a point where I am elected to MP, I'll be basically utilising my balance of power to make sure every black spot is taken care of and every promise that either Labor or Liberal have made is kept. That's something that I can do as part of the balance of power. We need to work with Telstra and we need to work with the federal government and address these issues. So I don't want to waffle on and make a whole bunch of promises. The reality is when given the opportunity, I will hold every promise accountable and I'll make sure it's delivered for the region.
I think we all know the situation when it came to the bushfires and telecommunications. No more serious probably on a lot of the beaches where the towers went out pretty much straight away. For the benefit of everybody, and having spoken to Telstra, they are in the process of now looking to double the battery capacity on all of the towers, and they're starting to roll that out right now. Wanderer, of course, is the main tower, and then a whole bunch of daisy chain towers that stem off that. So that's something which is happening right now by Telstra. I can also confirm that Telstra, through the Regional Connectivity Program, has rolled out some 1,300 towers nationwide, and they're still plugging some of the gaps. So the 2 gaps between, for instance, Bateman's Bay and Ulladulla have now been funded, and those towers are going in. In terms of the topography problems going up the Clyde, it's very obvious that there is going to continue to always be problems in terms of mobile phone coverage, given that topography and the access to power sources. In terms of the NBN, I've heard before all homes getting fibre. That's unrealistic. We are dependent in our region on a combination of satellite, fibre to the node, and where possible, fibre directly to the home. And there is more to be done in this space, which is why prior to the election the government did announce an extra $430 million to go into greater connectivity in the Gilmore electorate in terms of NBN connection, which then also flows through higher speeds, which is particularly relevant for small business. And then, of course, also trying to reduce the number of people who are currently dependent on Sky Muster, for instance, in terms of their satellite technology. There is no doubt we'll continue to see technological advancements in this regard, either in the telco space or with the NBN. We've had communities like Nelligan actually get NBN before they actually got mobile phone reception. So there are improvements that have been made over the last 10 to 15 years. There's more to come. And I certainly think in terms of the investment, it's got to be done in a way which is affordable for Australia.
Okay, second last question from me. This one's on aged care. The implementation of the recommendations from the Royal Commission in the aged care sector relies heavily on increasing the quality and number of staff. What will you or your party do to support increasing wage rates, training and professional development for aged care staff?
The Greens would support the 25% increase application, which is in the Fair Work Commission at the moment, and Labor have already committed to bringing that in regardless, so we will support that. And once again, it's if we're in a position of balance of power and we can work with the party who gains government, we can actually bring this in. It's about time that people were paid properly. It's about time that we look after our older and vulnerable members of our community. We need to increase the number of hours a day that they have help. At the moment, stressed people working in the industry are so stressed as they are in hospitals at the moment. We need to make sure that these people are supported, that they have adequate staffing, that they have nurses in nursing homes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was introduced by the Labor government and, the Liberal government when Tony Abbott came in. New South Wales, for a long time, allowed nurses or made sure nurses were there. And then eventually they relented and took nurses out of nursing homes as well. This is just not right. It is so unfair. We have to increase their pay, the staff. We have to help them be more qualified as well. With the COVID situation, showed a big hole in how we rely on foreign workers in this industry as well. We need to skill up our own people while we can, as much as we can. An interim with introducing workers from overseas, yes, but some of those countries they come from are in more need than we are. We should be upping our skills, not just in aged care, in disability, in all areas of health and education, and boosting our universities and our TAFE system to provide proper care for older people.
Well, this is my background. I've been a Parkinson's nurse in the Shoalhaven area for 7 years. I had 700 people in my books. Across the Gilmore region, there's something like 1,000 plus people with Parkinson's. There's been little funding for people with Parkinson's. It's an ageing condition. And there's also young people with this condition as well. So the Royal Commission into aged care was an extremely damning report. And it really showed up the flaws in the system and the amount of money spent. Now, what happens to people when they go into aged care is nearly all your assets are taken away from you and it gets shoved into the stakeholder. They get into a fund of money and you get your little $80 a week, and actually I think it's a fortnight. You don't get much money at the end of it. And the people in the aged care facilities, during the pandemic particularly, I'll tell you what happened to them. Nurses that were unjabbed lost their jobs. So the staff of the nurses dropped immediately. And to do that was a major flaw in the system, because those people, a lot of those people died all by themselves without their families visiting them, and that can never happen again. So we need to manage this pandemic a little bit more effectively before we start getting rid of nurses because of the jab. The other thing that I've got here is that it should not be about shareholders. It should be about the patient. It should be about the person in their home of residence. Bring the focus back to the people. And yeah, so that's basically all I have to say on that. There is a lot more I could say, but yeah, aged care and disabilities are the two areas that need more help. And I did see that the NDIS was going to strip funds from that as well. Can't happen.
Well, there's no doubt that the Aged Care Royal Commission shows what we already knew, that the aged care system is in crisis. An Albanese Labor government has been quite forthright about this, and we're going to take some bold steps and implement some of those major recommendations from the Aged Care Royal Commission, starting with a registered nurse in our aged care homes 24/7. Some of our aged care homes do that presently, some don't, but we're going to ensure that that does happen. That will also have benefits for our public health system, which is under the strain of aged care residents being taken to the hospital when they could have been treated by the registered nurse at the nursing home. We will also ensure that the minimum care hours that aged care workers get to spend with their residents is increased as well. I have heard story after story after year of where aged care workers and nurses have said to me they could not spend time with someone that was dying. This is how tragic it is, and people in our aged care homes are some of the most vulnerable people, and they deserve the respect and dignity. Just because they're in an aged care home doesn't mean they should be out of sight, out of mind. The government needs to take a prominent role in fixing this and giving people a dignified life, and that will happen under Labor. What we'll also do is ensure accountability and transparency with the information and the dollars, so where the dollars are going. So, you know, they're not going to be brought it somewhere, but they're actually going to the care of residents. And of course, we will support the case for an increase for pay for aged care workers in the Fair Work Commission, because it's the right thing to do. People in our aged care workers, it's a female-dominated industry from a long way back. There is great gender equality. The only way to fix this is through raising pay and addressing some of those issues that I've raised.
What I really think we need to look at in this industry is the fact that it's mostly private enterprise. The reality is we need to not utilise government money to bail these people out. We need some heavy-handed leverage on the actual private enterprise and just say the award is getting raised. We have to raise the award and make it better to work in these industries than just simply go to Coles and pack shelves. The reality is they've been getting away with far too much for far too long. They take anywhere between $300,000 to $700,000 off you in my hometown, and then they also take your pensions. As far as I'm concerned, these industries and these private enterprises need some heavy-handed government tactics and show them the right way. Because we can promise everything that we like. We can promise 24-hour nurses, but again, that's off the government's back and your taxpayer money. The reality is these guys are making a huge amount of profit and no one is holding them accountable. So when elected to Member of Parliament, I'll be holding everyone accountable in my region, and I sure as hell will make sure that any government of the day will be doing the same. Because again, the reality is we don't need your taxpayer money to pay for this. We can get the enterprises that are making the money to pay for it themselves. In the end, it's great to promise a 24-hour nurse, but the reality is the nursing industry as it stands right now, there's more nurses exiting the industry than there is entering. And what that means with a 3-year bachelor degree, there's no way that this policy is going to get off the ground without basically importing workers. The reality is we want to talk about jobs and everything like that. We have nurses here. We just need to make sure that we educate them, pay them the right amount, and make that job appealing to them.
First of all, ageing in place is one of the most important things that I sense around our community. I don't think you can define the whole industry based on some scrupulous operators. We've got fantastic community-based, not-for-profit aged care providers, particularly in the regions, who do an incredible job. And it's very important that with any Royal Commission finding, which the government did implement in the first place to try and get to the bottom of this, and then subsequently allocated $18 billion towards the sector, but we need to make sure that we've got the right expertise to actually implement as many of those recommendations as quickly as possible and do it in a way which supports those who are most in need. Now, residential aged care is one area in terms of this. We've also got to be looking more broadly at how we can support people age in their community, and particularly in terms of those community-based organisations. It wouldn't matter if it was Meals on Wheels through to home care, where those supports also come into play. It's also got to be remembered that in terms of Australia, the biggest social reforms have typically been bipartisan. So when I worked with it on the NDIS with Jenny Macklin, we were able to make huge inroads. And I think in this space, everybody knows that the unacceptability in terms of some of the treatments that are happening within residential aged care absolutely means that there's got to be a change in terms of some of those operations. So for me, making sure that it's completely and utterly done in a way which is respectful. It's also about looking at the system holistically in terms of ageing in place, particularly in our coastal communities, and also making sure that we are supporting our nurses. And that does mean better pay through Fair Work. There is a disparity between disability workers and those who work in aged care. That needs to be addressed immediately so that the pay issue is addressed, and then also, of course, the conditions. COVID has made it near impossible. Absolutely near impossible. And it's also very important in terms of the interface between those residents who are in aged care needing to access public health care is also something which is also very important, particularly given what we've seen in COVID. Thanks.
Okay, last question from me, and after that we will move to pre-submitted questions which will be asked from the floor, and then time permitting we will take some questions without notice, shall we call them. So Problems with the NDIS is the next and last topic from me. The NDIS is a nightmare for many people, with appeals against it to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal surging by 400% between July 2021 and January 2022, and the federal government spending some $28 million on its legal defence. My question, from your discussions with Gilmore residents, what areas of NDIS administration need to be improved? And do you consider an independent review is needed to address the major issues?
Yes, can I say there's many similarities with NDIS as there are in aged care issues. Outsourcing and privatisation was not the way the NDIS was supposed to be set up. It was supposed to be administered by the government, not to be sent out to private providers who want to make a profit, let's face it. COVID hasn't really made any difference to that. That was happening regardless. COVID we weren't prepared for. There are many people working in the NDIS system who probably are not actually qualified to be doing what they're doing. The assessors, being assessed every year is a dreadful thing, and people are telling us that they are finding this so traumatic. When people have an existing condition that is never going to get better, there should be an ongoing assessment that's been done in the very first instance and allowing them to continue to get the services they need. There needs to be revision of all of the... There's no uniformity across the board with the for-profit and outsourcing. Some people are paid over $100 an hour on a Sunday, and yet people are having their services taken away from them because they're being assessed by someone who's not qualified to assess that condition. People are being assessed at the very beginning by someone who... I heard a case on ABC Radio, Wollongong, a person who didn't know what cerebral palsy was. I mean, we just have to make this proper, do it the way it was set up. It was the Greens who helped introduce this in the first place when they were working with the Labor government, Julia Gillard's government. We need to make it proper, we need to make it uniform, and it has to be the government who oversees every dollar that's spent. And we need to look back over it. Yes, we would support an investigation, a commission of some sort to look at how the money has been spent, how it's been wasted, stop the waste, give it to everyone who's entitled to it.
Okay, just three things about this. We need to investigate the admin costs that are chewed up from the NDIS. I think most people have got some nods there. It's a lot of the administrative costs are totally inappropriate and need to be revisited, and I think a commission needs to go investigate into that. The other thing is a cap on what practitioners can actually charge. So some practitioners are charging, $190 an hour, $200 an hour. As a Parkinson's nurse, I'm a clinical nurse consultant. I was $50 an hour was mine. So we can see the practitioners are charging way above and are taking advantage of the NDIS funds for their own profits. So that needs to be investigated, and that needs to stop immediately as well. And many NDIS staff, I don't know if on the ground what I've seen, and I'm going to talk the pandemic again, because a lot of NDIS staff, no jab, no job policy meant a lot of NDIS employers had to leave, and the patients that they had that they were close to, unfortunately, left that person well in the lurch. So we need to look at a way how we can manage keeping people in the back, get them back into their jobs a little bit more, in a way where it's appropriate and safe and healthy for all. So they're my three things on the NDIS. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, just like Medicare, the pension and the NDIS are great Labor initiatives. I have to say that from the start. Any of those major initiatives are Labor initiatives. As the federal member for Gilmore, I get to work with a lot of people, a lot of constituents, and I see a lot of issues with the NDIS. The NDIS is a great program, absolutely, but we need to make sure that people are put at the centre of the NDIS. We have announced a review to strengthen the NDIS, to put people with a disability back at the heart of the NDIS. One of the biggest issues I see all the time is cuts to the NDIS, cuts to people's plans. For no particular reason, they just cut. I go back time and time again to the NDIA, I do that, I go to the Minister, and like my other candidates here have said, you know, this has just ballooned out of proportion, and now we're seeing more and more cases at the AAT. If you don't have someone to advocate for you, what happens to you? You know, and this is what I see every day. I have had to, in some cases, fight for over 18 months on behalf of a local family to get transport included. So a person with a disability can actually go out and receive the care they need. Why do they have to explain this time and time again? And their plans get cut. It's not good enough. One of the other things I see is obviously a difficulty accessing some services in the regions. That's an issue, and that's part of our review as well. And certainly the issue of transport, because the way that transport is covered in plans is not the same as in the city. Transport in the country is not the same as the city. You can't just hop on a train. You know, so it's very... people in the country are very disadvantaged with their NDIS plans with regards to transport. So there's a whole lot of things. I'd just like to thank everybody that does work with the NDIS. They're all champions, and their families, carers and people with a disability.
Okay, I've been a healthcare professional in the region of Gilmore for 11 years. What we've really seen is two basically points in the NDIS suffer. One is mental health. It's very, very hard to get any help with respect to the NDIS and mental health. Ask any parent with an autistic child, they also struggle with a lot of the classifications and a lot of the funding. Many companies that started early on were overcharging and overutilising their patients' fees, and what you saw was a lot of independent people starting to use basically their own ABN or something like that, because they were actually sick of seeing the wastage come from these overlying companies. So we've got to start looking at the groups that are utilising the money too much and understanding why. The reality is we had all these little independent operators go out on their own. They can literally charge almost half of what some of the primary companies are charging and still give an amazing service to these people. As an example, if you have an autistic child, a weighted blanket is no longer covered. Ask me that why. But then you can always find someone else who has a story that they're getting coverage. There needs to be some means or standardisation of the actual coverage. Right now, if you don't use your appropriated funds or something hasn't worked out for you, like occupational health, and you want to try something else, that funding comes away from you the next year. If it's standardised and in each individual condition it has a set amount per year and it's consistent, it allows the people and the carers associated with the patient, if you want to call them that, to actually make better decisions for themselves. So there's a lot of room for improvement, but the reality is, yeah, we have to look at it and we have to work out where the flaws in the actual system are, and it does require a review. My hope is that the review doesn't reduce funding, because it does need to be fully funded as well. So thank you.
It's a fundamental human right to be able to have choice and control over your life, and one of the principles behind the establishment of the National Disability Insurance Scheme was choice and control. My observation over the last few years is the way in which the bureaucracy has in essence started to dictate to people with disabilities, their carers and their families as to what services they should and shouldn't have is something which is removing in many ways that fundamental principle to what the scheme was applied for. You know, there is no doubt if you look at moving from a state government funded, block funded system to particularly the NGOs to an individualised funding model, the aim was to actually give the supports through an individualised plan to those who wanted to ensure that their life was given that, as I said, choice and control over their supports. It seems to me that that principle has been walked away from, and there is no doubt to be able to reaffirm that back into the scheme, we actually have to look at what is causing that, and that does relate to individualised funding plans. I remember the two carers, parent carers, the other morning, and the key point that they were making is that their adult child with severe disabilities didn't have a long-term plan when it came to their future housing. If either of them had lost their life, they wanted to know that their adult child was safe and supported. And so whilst the individualised funding plans operate in the short term, we also need to be looking at the whole of life pathway for the person with disability. I've also had other leaders in the sector say that there's a lot of plan underutilisation. And that's, again, part of the challenge. Now, that doesn't mean you cut anyone's supports and services at all. And the scheme, and I agree with Jordan in this regard, people with mental illness with permanent disability are falling through the cracks in Australia right now. So we have to ensure that the scheme, 10 years on, is examined, but also keep in mind the impact that a review could have in terms of the overall sector and the fear that that could bring. Thanks.
Okay, next questions from the floor. Frank, could you put your hand up, please?
Thank you. The question I have is access to healthcare. Wait times to see primary healthcare providers in rural and regional Australia is dramatically increasing, along with out-of-pocket costs for healthcare across the board. The Commonwealth is directly responsible for primary health funding through Medicare. What do you think needs to happen to address the inequity and deficiency in healthcare in our region?
The regions are really suffering because very few GPs are bulk billing. I'm not too sure what the numbers are down here, but to find a bulk billing doctor in the northern part of the electorate is very difficult. And it's expensive. People can't afford it. And we need to make sure that GPs are adequately funded from the HIC so that they can offer bulk billing, especially to people on low incomes. The out-of-pocket expenses for specialists are also quite unbelievable, really. If you go to a specialist to pay up front, and this applies to pensioners and people on Centrelink benefits as well. They have to pay up front. That has to stop. There has to be no gap for people who need medical assistance from specialists. The Greens believe that the regions, the remote, regional and areas outside of the cities need to have the same kind of parity to medical access to things such as chemotherapy, radiotherapy. The distance that people have to travel from here especially is bad enough. Even in the northern area, people are travelling to Campbelltown and Wollongong to get treatment. And it's not fair. It's not fair. Everyone should be able to access what they need without the stress of long distances having to travel. The other thing that's in the news today is the cost of prescriptions. A $6.80 script for a person on a very low income who's struggling to pay their bills and buy food and pay rent is too much. That has to come down too, because often people have comorbidity, they need to treat several different conditions, and that's more than one script a month. We need to look at this and make it fairer overall, instead of always looking at cutting down the cost to the people who are already fairly comfortable and don't even have a mortgage. $90,000. I think we really need to look at that policy.
I used to work in a medical centre, worked in several, and some of the things I've noticed on the ground that need attention is, and more of late, there's been a massive focus on the pandemic and not on care planning. So what I find is that people have missed out on their health checks and their care plans. So that's something that needs to be addressed for people, particularly of the ageing cohort and people with disabilities, to ensure that the GPs are honouring your yearly care plans. Doctors have been also mandated through protocols through the AMA, and they do require some self-determination in their care and practice, so they can actually initiate treatments that they feel is beneficial for you instead of being told through protocols. The other thing is that GPs just don't want to get moved to the regions, particularly those who are younger and they have children, because what they say is the schools aren't good enough, the hospitals aren't good enough, they don't make enough money down here, and there's not enough infrastructure. So I think there probably needs some investment in those areas in regional towns, and I think we can probably attract more doctors. It is more attractive for them in the cities because they learn more, they get more experience, like they get the, they get more varied cases in the city areas, and a lot of them who aren't interested in aged care in general practice won't come down here. So there probably needs to be also from the federal government some incentive to keep the GPs in the regions. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I think we all saw firsthand at Tuross Head what happens when your local GP clinic closes down, and I was proud to join with people here and take that fight up. And that's a fight that I've continued because that actually opened up a whole range of things and shortcomings in the system, and obviously how hard it is to access GPs in general and the rising out-of-pocket expenses. So I have been working very closely with the Primary Health Network, a lot of the Rural Doctors Alliance and different GP groups as well. And I also fought to have the distribution priority area status changed across the coast, and that was to allow more doctors that were from overseas to allow them to be here, because there were rules in place that actually prevented that in some areas as well. They said that couldn't be changed, and I looked at them, I started a petition, and we actually got that changed, so I'm pretty proud about that. One of the things as well that we've said, we've announced 50 urgent care clinics, so Medicare clinics around Australia, and these are clinics that people can go to be bulk billed, for things like sprains and things like that. And I'm fighting to get one of those urgent care clinics here in the Eurobodalla. I proudly fought alongside Dr. Michael Holland in support of the Level 4 Eurobodalla Hospital. Pretty proud about that to join with the community, and it's something that I've never backed away from. I fought to get radiotherapy services here, got a commitment on that at the last election, didn't get elected. The Morrison government matched the commitment, but guess what? There's no radiotherapy services have been delivered, which is a disgrace. So that is something that I will be fighting for, to make sure that cancer patients do not have to travel further away than they need to. Of course, we've got cuts to Medicare. The government acts Medicare item 288 regarding psychiatric consultations. We're reversing that cut. I'm proud to say that.
Thank you again. Now, if we look at the system, basically you have a system where the federal government funds into essentially a state government. There's two levels of bureaucracy there, and there's two levels of mismanaged money. What the United Australia Party doing is looking at basically transferring money federally directly to where it needs to go, taking away a level of bureaucracy. Every time the money changes hands, it's wasted, and that's taxpayer money wasted. I have a lot of colleagues that are in the industry, and like I said, I've been in the industry myself. Anyone will tell you everyone's overworked down here. There's not enough people and there's not enough facilities. From my region, I've been the only one pointing out the fact that there has been talks had around essentially closing the Milton Emergency Department and turning it into a hospice or rehab type facility. I've been calling out for people to try and deny this claim, and it's just been absolutely flawed. No one's come out and said anything. I've been trying to get anyone to pay attention to it, and the reality is there's been no funding on a state level and a federal level. From the United Australia Party perspective, we're committing $40 billion to go directly into the healthcare industry, again bypassing the states. One of the benefits of the 15% export licence is that we will have covered a hell of a lot of the national debt, and we can start using that money instead of paying interest to basically inject into the education system as well as all of the healthcare system. So thank you.
Look, I agree in terms of the access to primary health care. I think certainly in terms of the regions, it's no doubt in terms of the primary health care network, an area that does need to be expanded because it ultimately sits alongside the acute services provided within hospitals and of course also the work that's done through GP clinics. The reality is that the bulk billing rate in Australia has increased by 7% in the last 10 years, so it's up to 88.8%, which is the highest it's ever been, and that means that basically 9 out of 10, almost 9 out of 10 visits to the doctor are now bulk billed. Our biggest challenge in terms of in terms of local, yeah, it's up to 88, the bulk billing rate. But locally, if I can just finish the sentence, is that in terms of access to bulk billing, that is one of our greatest challenges. The reality is, in terms of the supply of doctors in the regions and the attractiveness to do so, is one of the key challenges. Now, you all know, certainly in terms of the regional hospital level 4, and now with the site acquired, that we are going to see that facility built at Moruya. The important thing in relation to that is also what can sit alongside that hospital. I had a very constructive meeting with all 3 universities in the TAFE recently in relation to a clinical school and also a faculty which specialises in rural health, which, you know, my big belief is that we must have a clinical school sit alongside the level 4 hospital so that doctors and nurses are being trained locally here in the Eurobodalla, so ultimately we can broaden out our medical workforce. And I think that is one of the most important steps that needs to happen now, in light of the fact that the planning approval in terms of the facility will hopefully be complete by the middle of the year, and construction will start later on in the year with early works and then moving into full contractor work next year. There is no doubt in terms of the training of doctors in a regional setting like ours is probably one of the most important steps we can take moving forward, and that's what I'm going to continue to fight for.
Hi, I'm Bernie O'Neill from A Better Eurobodalla. I've got a question about governance. Given the revelations of the last few years, including questionable government decision-making in grants programs, will you support establishing a powerful, transparent and independent federal anti-corruption commission with the ability to receive complaints, conduct its own investigations, the power to conduct public hearings in some circumstances, and the capacity to be retrospective within limitations so that the conduct that would be assessed against the laws, practices and standards that applied at the time of the conduct?
Thank you for that question. I think that's one that's very important. Before I go on though, I'm a bit at a disadvantage being the first one. I did forget to say that the Greens want to include mental and dental in Medicare. And we've done Medicare in the beginning where it was free to everyone. We can go back to that. We have to go back to that. We have to go back to the original ideal. An anti-corruption commission, definitely. We need one fast. The Greens and Helen Haines have worked to pass one through the Senate already, a bill, and it can go through the lower house. Labor doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. It will be an excellent bill. It will be public hearings. It will be politicians and public servants who need to be there. There will be protection for whistleblowers and journalists and anyone else who needs to come forward about seeing what they see and know that it's wrong, because it's been going on for far too long. None of this private in-camera trial. It's not a trial, it's a corruption commission, an anti-corruption commission. We need to get on with it and get it done fast. Labor have said that they will have it before the end of the year. Let's hope they will keep their word on that if they're elected to government. We also need to have in real time for lobbyists and any kind of people who are working with the government to have a diary where we know how much time with whom they've spoken and about what. We also need to have political donations in real time. It's a digital world. They should be recorded online. We should know exactly where they're from at the time they're made. There's no excuse not to. So we need to work hard to make this happen because there's been too much rorting. There are actually invisible grants being made that I've heard about recently, large amounts of money, and they're virtually invisible. They don't come under any of these programs that we've heard about. There'll be more to be said on those later.
I totally concur. Yes, we need an ICAC, we need a Royal Commission. We also need our constitution looked into as well, because that's something that has since 1901 we have had a constitution that's been flawed and it's been corrupted through politics over the ages. That has to be dealt with, and I won't go into great detail. I do agree with public hearings and transparency. We need to conduct and ensure that we've got our values and accountability noted publicly, and we need whistleblower protections. I have been someone who has whistleblowed in the past, and I tell you what, it is not a nice position to be in. And these people who do expose corruption and they do say what they need to say in these commissions can be ostracised. And we know from the example, our own Australian Julian Assange is a whistleblower. He had some really important things to say to Australians that would have saved us a lot of hassle. It's a very, very big story that he had to say, and he never got to say it because they locked him up. I personally have exposed things like sexual abuse in the health system, and I was shut down. So whistleblower protections, when these ICAC hearings are heard, need to be in place. So I just want to thank you for your question. Thank you. And I just want to thank all the brave people out there who do speak up for truth and justice. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I get a lot of emails from people demanding or wanting a federal anti-corruption commission, and I'm really pleased to say that the Albanese Labor government supports the federal anti-corruption commission, not just an anti-corruption commission, but one with real teeth, one that will look back. Proud to say that we will implement that. That has been our policy for some time. We will absolutely deliver that if we win government. I do have a fact sheet, I believe, on that one as well. On our National Anti-Corruption Commission. All of those are available on my website as well. But it's long overdue. The government said they'd do it. They haven't done it. They don't deserve a second chance. Only an Albanese Labor government will deliver a federal anti-corruption commission.
Okay, the United Australia Party are going to take this one step further. Obviously, we support a federal ICAC, but we're also going to enact a Bill of Rights. So that way, career politicians, politics in general, as well as the community and every single citizen will be covered by a Bill of Rights. It's not actually, how would we say, it's not actually correctly enacted in this country. We can discuss that later if you like, but, well, it's not actually, because we've got a big team looking at it, and yeah, we're very well resourced and we know what we're talking about. So thank you for that anyway. But the reality is, yeah, I mean, we've all witnessed corruption. We've seen Labor take $100 grand off a Chinese developer in New South Wales. We've seen a few issues with the Liberal Party. So in the end, there needs to be an ICAC with teeth, and there needs to be people held accountable. So thank you.
Naturally, I'm going to support an ICAC, having been a minister in New South Wales who's had to report a diary in terms of who I've met with for the last 10.5 years, and I think that should be applicable. And a ministerial code of conduct, which is also applicable under a Corruption Act. I don't understand why the country hasn't had a corruption authority for the last 30 years, to be honest. I mean, Nick Greiner introduced one 30 years ago, and that's when it should have happened. And it needs to be applicable across, it also needs to be applicable across not only the public servant, where we quite often see contracts issued, but also, of course, more broadly across politicians. Because one of the greatest things that can happen in a democracy is for the community to have confidence in the decisions that are being made. One of the other things which is also important is the model of delivery. And as part of that, I actually think corruption watchdogs should have rules of evidence and prosecutorial powers, which is the case in some jurisdictions around the world. I'm not quite sure, though, just in relation to the public inquiry process, although it acts as a deterrent, we need to be very careful in terms of what can happen in that circumstance. If you look at the number of prosecutions that have happened over the last 30 years in New South Wales versus the number of public inquiries and adverse findings actually moving to a prosecution, that's one thing that does need to be looked at and properly assessed. So this is something that should have happened a long time ago. Obviously, I support it, and it needs to happen pretty quick.
We haven't finished yet. Yeah, thank you. So this is from myself as President of the Tuross Head Progress Association. It's in regard to accessibility of the local member. So if successful at this federal election, you will be our representatives in federal parliament, and you are the person we come to when we need help. Noting that for the last 5 years, our previous state member replied to no emails or letters or returned phone calls, as our federal member, what will you do to ensure the citizens of Gilmore can contact you, receive a response or action to issues they wish to bring to your office?
Well, with the many modes of communication available to us today, there's really no excuse to not have some way of being contacted. Whether it's a phone number, which you can record a voice, everyone uses a phone. Not everyone uses Messenger, but there's Messenger, there's all sorts of email addresses. There is no excuse not to be available. And of course, if I'm elected to represent you, I would have staff. So I would make sure that that was essential, high priority, that I would always be contacted if it's immediate or if there's a time lag that is allowed, but with reasonable time to return the communication so that whoever needs help or wants a question answered, that nothing would be left. Nothing would be left lingering and nothing would be ignored, because you are the servant of the people. You are voted there to be the servant of the people, and you have to answer to the people's needs that you represent.
So I don't think you should make promises you can't keep. Accessibility to the local member. Okay, you can try a Zoom link, but sometimes we don't have the internet for that. What I think actually needs to happen is that we need to rezone our borders. We need to rezone our electoral, it's too big. Let's be honest, the Gilmore goes from Kiama all the way to Tuross. So what we need is a member that can be here for you. How does someone that lives in Bomaderry possibly stretch their own resources that far? So I think, to be honest, we need to review all the borders across the entire country and have members that are present for their people, and also have the local governments work more closely with the members as well. The local government are the tier of government that's supposed to be closest to the people. So that would be a solution. That would be a way forward. We need to have a national conversation about it. You are the bum end of the electorate, and you get the bum end of everything, I can imagine. So I'm gonna acknowledge that out loud, because I'm in Bomaderry, so I know everything's going on up my way, but down your way, to be honest, it's a massive stretch. So I'm not going to make a promise I can't keep, but what I would like to see is that if I do get elected, is that we have a national conversation about altering the size of the boundaries. Thanks.
Thanks. Well, Nina, I've got to disagree with you there. There is no way in the world I would like to give up Tuross Head in the electorate of Gilmore. I have had the utmost privilege of working with the Tuross Head Progress Association on many great projects. And I've got to say, so many different community groups here, and I know they're here tonight. It is just magnificent. And, how could you not love Tuross Head? It's one of the most beautiful places, and what I guess what I find when I come to Tuross Head, which really intrigues me, is that so many people volunteer for different groups. And I see that move around, and I think that is so special. So that makes me want to be a real part of this community and keep those communication lines open. One of the things that I did when I first was elected, I opened an office in Bateman's Bay, and I was I think, the only member in Bateman's Bay, or in that office in the Eurobodalla in Bateman's Bay. And I did that for a reason, because I thought that people here deserved at least to have an office or something, somewhere they could go to have that connection. I've made a real effort to try and go to as many community events as possible, whether it's the men's shed, whether it's marine rescue, whether it's going to the markets or whatever it is. So whether it's phone, whether it's email, whether it's, I'm there. I'm in Parliament all the time talking about stories of people in Tuross Head, what's happened. I think there's many ways that we can keep in touch. I'm a very grassroots person and, as I said, love Tuross Head, love to keep in contact. My commitment is to always do that and to fight for people in Tuross Head.
There's a pretty simple solution to this issue. As Member of Parliament and getting paid by you guys a very good salary, I'll make a commitment to come down and meet you in person once a month or once every 2 months, whatever suits you guys. The reality is there's much bigger electorates than Gilmore. It's not that big. And you get to drive down the most beautiful coastline and chat to all of you guys. So when elected to Parliament, I'll be utilising your tax money, strangely enough, to work for you and come and meet you in person. So thanks.
Given that the question was directed at me, I'll first of all apologise to you if that's how you feel. But I've worked tirelessly for almost 20 years as a state member, and so too has Gail and Shannon in my office. We've helped a hell of a lot of people out. And, I look at this community, driving to the car park at the country club, they reached out, they were supported. I've come in here and done village visits and made myself available. So I'm sorry that you weren't able to reach me, as you said, in 5 years. But my record in terms of this community, I'm happy to stand by. And in terms of delivery and the work and representing everybody, regardless of their political persuasion, to the best of my ability, I will continue. I want to see our politics improved. I don't want to come here tonight and take that type of question, quite frankly. I think, ultimately, our community is wonderful and the people in it are wonderful. And I love it. And I've seen the best and worst in it. So I will continue my passion. I think most people think that there was a massive bureaucracy behind me down in Bega. It was Gail and Shannon and myself. So, I'm sorry that the Progress Association feels that way. And for whatever reason, I'm happy to discuss why, personally. Thanks.
This question was Deb Stevenson, who is representing a coalition of climate action group, was going to put this question to the candidates tonight, but she texted me about half an hour ago to say that she's just out from COVID and she had to leave. So I'm going to read this on her behalf. The current coalition government has committed to a greenhouse emissions target of 26 to 28% by 2030. But the science clearly says we need to cut emissions by at least 50% by 2030 to avoid runaway climate change and the extreme weather conditions. For example, mega bushfires and 1 in 1,000-year floods associated with this. Question: what do you think of the government's emissions targets and what target is your party committing to?
I think we should probably stick to the basics here. We think the government's target is appalling, and it's really only to satisfy their big political donors, the fossil fuel industry. 2050 is far too late. We are told continuously by the IPCC that we have to act now, and we, the Greens, are proposing, by taxing billionaires and big companies that are making super profits, taking them offshore, we can afford to have a 75% cut in emissions by 2030, and 100% zero net emissions by 2035, with 100% renewable energy by 2030. As I said before, this is our plan, and it looks at transport, it looks at all the various things. Obviously, some things are going to be slower than others, but introducing electric vehicles only to import or manufacture electric vehicles by 2030. There will be cheap electric vehicles on the market by then for other people. And of course, people will drive their cars until they finish. We can do it. We can do it. It just is going to take political will instead of willful neglect, which is what's happened so far. But it's all about political donations. That has to stop. The $12 billion investment in fossil fuels by the government, giving 10,000-fold return on political donation investment, has to stop. We can do it. We can reach climate control. It's still going to have some effect. It's going to take time to help reverse the effects of climate change because we've taken too long to do it. We had actually originally wanted to get to zero net emissions by 2030. That is getting harder. The longer we take to do it, the more disasters and the more it's going to cost us. So we have to start now.
Well, obviously emissions aren't good for health and well-being, for animals and our biodiversity, so I agree that we need to do that. I don't have a party. I stand on my own and will negotiate with parties these things. And like I said before, there's other technologies that we need to adopt. We don't need to be using huge amounts of gas and fossil fuels. We can be using Tesla and renewable energy, hydro energy with water. There's been technologies in the past that a lot of people don't know about, was being kept from us. And those sorts of technologies need to be reinstated. The history books were rewritten. You don't know this yet, but there's a whole lot of stuff. Tesla actually did a lot more work than we ever knew in that space. And that includes using technology for helping to cure diseases like cancer and neurological diseases. So I know I digressed a bit from the climate issue there, but I'm just saying that we need to institute some sort of employment or a technology or education hub so that we can have people with skills and talents in enhancing renewable technology and Tesla technology into the future. Thank you.
Well, what do I think of the government's emissions target? It stinks. I've got to say, sitting in Parliament, listening to the continual climate wars between the coalition, and I'm talking about the Liberals, the Nationals, there is no climate consensus there. You listen, you go, can't they just come up with an energy policy? How hard can it be? We've seen attack after attack. We've seen, even in the latest budget, we saw money taken out of the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. An Albanese Labor government does have a medium-term target, and that is reducing emissions by 43% by 2030. It's backed by the Powering Australia plan, which has solid policies to back it up, to transition to renewables, to boost renewables jobs, to cut power bills. It's good news all around. It's backed by the Business Council of Australia, the National Farmers Federation. There's a reason the government hasn't been knocking our plan, because it's the right thing to do.
Well, speaking now, we've heard the Greens talk about their plan. Not one budgetary repair comment and a whole lot of expenditure. We've heard Labor talk, not one budgetary comment and all about expenditure. The reality is the credit card is maxed. The country can't go into any more debt. We can claim all we like, but what's it going to cost our future generations? We need to get inflation under control now. We need to pay off the Liberal and Labor credit card bill, and then we need to allow the transition to a greener energy to happen swiftly and in controlled fashion, that people don't lose their jobs, that we don't rip the 25% out of the New South Wales budget that currently comes from coal. Because again, I remind you, we're $1.3 trillion in debt. We're not getting out of this quickly. Consecutive Labor and Liberal governments have put us in this position. So the reality is we're the only party standing here to propose paying off the national debt. Until that's under control, I'm afraid it's all just smoke and mirrors, and I'm not going to stand here and lie to you guys. We have some really pressing issues as a nation, and unfortunately it all involves money. So I've got to stand here and be the bad guy and tell you the poor message, but the reality is I'm not here to bullshit you guys. I'm here to tell you the cold, hard truth, and until we get our country under control and start running it properly, nothing's going to happen. Again, end consumer affordability is one of the biggest factors that we need to look at. If you can't pay your mortgage, you're not going to choose greener options. If you can't afford your groceries, you're not going to choose green options. So we're here to tell you the bad news. We've got to get this budget under control. We've got to pay off the national debt, and then we'll transition to a clean energy future.
Whilst managing the national economy is critical to being able to support the initiatives that everybody wants to see, you know, I think in terms of the missing link in terms of climate change policy is the reality is that the state governments are doing a lot of heavy lifting right now in terms of energy, transport, agriculture and the like. And whilst the national government can set targets, and the reality is I think the innovators in business will beat those targets. It's been proven before and will continue to be proven again. And I think everybody would like to see us reach net zero emissions as quickly as possible, but at the same time leave no Australians behind. My sister's a mining engineer in a coal mine in the Hunter. In fact, she met the leader of the opposition there the other day. She didn't tell him that she was my sister, but you know, the reality is that both sides of politics in this regard are very sensitive to the transition for thousands of people. You know, I do think in terms of the states, some of the initiatives that we are seeing at a state level, if we could better direct some of the resources to move those along, microgrids, obviously batteries, making sure that we do see the right investments into things like green hydrogen. I mean, our region, particularly further up the coast of Port Kembla, is going to become a hydrogen hub. And I think that the jobs will grow. We're seeing that type of innovation work elsewhere around the world. But also I think Australians are pretty smart. They're innovators. I think it's a great shame we don't have our own battery production here, given that we're pulling the nickel out of the ground and exporting it overseas, and between the Europeans and the Chinese, they're developing the batteries. I actually think Australians can come up with it. We've seen that with electric buses, as I alluded to before. I said clearly, by 2030, let's convert the diesel fleet to electric. And guess what happens? Australian manufacturing produces a bus 30% more efficient than anything out of China, and that's the type of result we can get by looking at our own resilience, looking at a circular economy, and making sure that we take the sting and the politics out of this and start to get the results in terms of innovation, the right allocation of taxpayer dollars to support the innovation in an appropriate way.
My name's Lee Parker. I'm the editor of The Beagle. A question, if I can, and it's really quite critical. We saw in the last election what happened with young Warren Mundine when he got parachuted in. And I put up on The Beagle an interesting flowchart of what happened with the votes. We're all compelled to vote 1 to 7 on our green form and 1 to 12 on our white. And what was really quite critical at the last election was the preferences. And it came right down to the very last line where Fiona came up with 56% and young Warren only got 51%. But it was right down to the wire, right to the very, very end. And it's really quite critical that everyone is totally aware of the absolute vital importance where you put your number 2, your number 3, your number 4, 5, 6 and 7. On your how to votes, what we will see is your preferences of who you would like to get into bed with, who you're happy with, and we'll see your number 7 as being the person you least want to get into bed with. Can you advise us who your preferences are and why you've made that choice?
Well, I think it's going to be pretty obvious that it'll be 1 Greens, because it makes a difference if you put 1 Green. Even if you want to vote Liberal or Labor, it's sending a message to those 2 parties. And there's nothing going to change unless more of a message is sent to them. If they continue to get 1s, they just coast along and do the same old things or don't do what they should have done, neglecting all their duties as they have with this government we have now, putting us in a most unsafe position. So we recommend voting number 1. The next most important thing is really one of those 2 major parties will be elected. So all it really matters is whether you put Liberal or Labor first. And of course we tend to be left-wing and talk about humanities, refugees, all those things. And we see Labor as the only other party on that list that has any policies anywhere near ours. We still think ours are better, of course. And of course, we're also aiming for balance of power. So in the Senate, it's 6 above the line or 12 below the line, one or the other. 6 above or 12 below. And the same thing, we have actually got on our how to vote a few other little parties in between, but 4 other parties, I can't remember them all, and 6 Labor above the line. That's our recommendation. And that's because we want to aim to get David Shoebridge as our number 1 candidate into the Senate. He's brilliant in the New South Wales Upper House. He's actually brought in laws to make the behaviour in the House better and more exposure of, well, what we're talking around the ICAC idea of politicians taking responsibility for their behaviour and how they behave in the House. We want him as number 1. We want a balance of power so that we can influence whichever government it is. There could be some Teals there. It could be a whole different kind of government, more like the Nordic system. So 1 for the Greens in both houses, please.
Okay, just so you know, my perspective, I'm an independent, so I'm neither left or right. I am balanced in the middle. What I know about what I've read about the Australian Constitution is that the political parties have not honoured our Constitution since 1901. That Constitution was written for the people, and the people have not been served over many, many decades. So what's been happening, you all should know, the political parties have been honouring their own Constitution and not that of the people. I cannot, in all honesty, support the major parties because we need to serve the people, not the political parties. So you notice the seesaw. Yes, we go Liberal and we get their policies in, and we go Labor and they get their ones in. And guess what? The people's voices don't actually get heard. I am over it, and that's why I am running, because I believe the people need their voices heard. The 1901 Constitution, do some research on it. You will see in 1973 when things altered dramatically for us, the Australian people. So a lot of you, you know, you deserve to be empowered. That's why I say empower, Gilmore. You deserve to be empowered. You deserve to have some influence in the decision making. Do you know there's legislation being passed now that you've got no idea about, like the Digital Identity Bill? So that's why I'll put the majors last. I'm just going to finish off. I don't actually have preferences. The preferences is up to you. You choose where you want to put your people, and I honour that. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh, for your question. And I think your question was, who did we place 7th? And I have placed One Nation candidate last. And I have done that for a reason. My view is that extreme parties and candidates should be placed last. That's absolutely where they should be placed. And I don't make any excuse for that. I've actually placed Andrew Constance above One Nation. So my question would be to Andrew Constance where he's placed One Nation and what he stands for. Because if you're a progressive person, you don't put One Nation above a progressive party. So I think very careful questions should be asked about where people have preferenced, particularly those extreme parties like One Nation. Sorry, I can tell you them all. The question was who was our number 7. Number 1 obviously is Fiona Phillips. Number 2 is Carmel Mccallum here. Number 3 is Adrian Fedini. Number 4 is Andrew Constance. Number 5 is Nina. Number 6 is Jordan here. And number 7 is One Nation.
Well, it also appears Labor finds paying off the national debt an extreme policy, so I apologise to you guys about that. The reality is you guys are in control of the preferences. I mean, we are essentially giving you basically an instruction manual on how to use the TV remote. The reality is we need to start educating you on making your own decisions. Don't listen to the political parties. Make your own decisions, do your own research. This is what the point of these individual nights are. You get to know us, you get to know what we stand for, you get to hear what we talk about, okay? Again, my preferences as far as my how to vote cards are, I'll be putting all the minor parties first. I do support basically sound national policy, so in the end we want to basically unseat Fiona, so Andrew will be in front of Fiona on my how to vote cards. They're the questions that you want to answer or have answered, but we do want to see you guys better educated in the preferential system because we have no influence on it. You guys are in total control of your own votes.
Well, obviously I'd advocate you all vote 1 for me. It goes without saying, but I think there's a bit of signage around the place with Liberal on it, quite frankly. Yes, so, look, just on that, okay, well, I just want to run through the preferences. 1, Liberal. 2, Jordan. 3, well, just, okay. Well, you asked the question, so 3, Liberal Democrats, 4, Pauline Hanson, 5, Nina, 6 Labor, and 7 Greens. And,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I think those responses say it all, really.
Yep.
Thank you.
And we've got one very quick last question. He's guaranteed me it's a yes, no answer is required. That is all.
Thank you, but I'll be very quick. Andrew, I think I'm going to answer your question as to why there is no federal ICAC, and that's money. You all receive political donations. No, I don't. Sorry, except for the independent. My apologies. No, that's all right, mate. And I will vote for you first for that reason. Until the money is taken out of politics for federal elections and state and local, we will never have a true democracy. So my question to all of you, particularly the 2 major parties, will you seek to abolish political donations by big corporations, big gas, big coal, big petrol, big unions, all of them across the board, and publicly fund elections so we have a true democracy? Yes or no? Abolish donations.
The Greens don't take corporate, or we only take donations from individuals. And yes, we will abolish all of those. And we'd like to have public funding of elections so that we don't have political donations at all, actually.
So I'm going to say this because, and I don't want sympathy for it, I actually have to go into my home loan to pay for this campaign. And I'm doing that because I believe in what I'm doing. So I hope I get more than 4% of the vote because that means I can actually get some money back. So I am actually sticking my neck fairly out and I'm nervous. But hey, it means something to be empowered, to have your voice. I won't be able to, I know for a fact I won't please all of you. What I want to do is just stand for truth and justice and have our country back. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't answer with a yes or no because sadly elections do cost money. That is the reality of the situation. As a candidate and all candidates, we have to abide by the rules of the Australian Electoral Commission, and that's what I do, and that's what I'll always aim to do. We should have greater disclosure, absolutely. The reality is that most of my things, we had a movie fundraiser last night. Like most of the things are small raffles and small donations. So that's the reality of the situation. The Australian Electoral Commission. Well, no, the Australian Electoral Commission has the rules and that's what we have to follow as candidates.
Well, firstly, I know you guys think that my party's received a lot of donations, but the reality is we're funded by a private enterprise, and there hasn't been a single taxpayer dollar spent on my policy on my campaign. So again, you can't start telling how individuals can spend their own money. If they want to spend it on a political campaign, or if they want to run for politics, let them. I mean, you can say what you like about my party, but like I said, not a single taxpayer dollar has been spent on my campaign or anyone in the Australian electorate's campaigns. So the hard thing is, I'll speak about it from my perspective, right? I'm a small business owner that lives in Ulladulla, and I decided to run for politics so I could stick up for my people. The reality is I don't have a big budget. I earn a good amount of money, but I also have a $750,000 mortgage and 2 kids to pay. So to think that you can stand up and start basically sticking up for your constituents and your people, the reality is you need financial backing. And your job is to convince the people to back you financially, and that's a part of the political process. I don't stand for big, Labor-style payments of $100,000 cash in bags. The reality is, if someone does want to, fund you, that's fantastic. So, again, I have to stand with Fiona on this one. This is just how politics works. Okay, but then, as an individual in my situation, I couldn't run for politics because of, money, and that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
Can you ask him after?
Well, can I ask you a question? How would you pay for a television advertising campaign then? So you want to spend taxpayer money on political? Well, I don't. I'm standing to save taxpayer money. That's why I'm running for politics. I don't want to see taxpayer money wasted on politics.
Could you pass it over, please? Thank you.
The answer's no, but let me answer the question. First and foremost, I agree with you. In an ideal world, that'd be awesome. Because I, like Fiona, are sick of doing fundraisers. But we've already tested in the High Court at a state level, and we've seen the banning of property developers. We've seen the banning of alcohol outlets. We've seen the banning of gaming. We tried to obviously also see the banning of unions. And in that case, the High Court, in its application of the Constitution, said that they could continue to donate. So I agree with your sentiment. But do I think it's going to change anytime soon? No. And I think ultimately, the concern out of this room is that you can buy your seat into Parliament, and that's something which again needs to be part of the discussion because it's important. So thank you for your question.
It's all right. We're finished. Yes, please. And please feel free to come up and speak individually to the candidates. I do thank you all for coming.